Hey, what's up everyone? This is Snackbox. Hope you all are having a great day. Guys, we have some big news. New buffs are incoming. We got 2 rebalances for champions that were quite underwhelming. And one of them is going to be Fjorad, the mythical dwarf champion. He has been, really underwhelming, especially for PvP. He found some use with this skill right here that decreases the cooldown of all ally skills, but then again, in my opinion, it just wasn't enough, right? There are a few other champions that can do the same thing. Basically, you have a painkiller which is a rare champion that can do the same thing. Obviously, you can cycle it back faster because here he gets an extra turn, but it also costs mythical books to book it and is much more expensive. And here is the rebalance for the base form. The A1 attacks one enemy 2 times. Each hit has a 50% chance of placing a freeze debuff for 1 turn, still the same. And then this is new. This debuff cannot be blocked or resisted if the target champion is from the Gallon Pact. And there are actually a few PvP champions in the Gallon Pact which might be quite interesting, to use Fjorad against, and we will take a look at that in a second. If the target is not under freeze debuff, we'll repeat the attack once. So pretty much the same, just that the Gallon Pact champions cannot block or resist this freeze. Now, the A2 is completely the same. It won't be rebalanced or buffed, which is totally fine. And the A3, Wolfheart's Rage, attacks all enemies, places a freeze debuff on all enemies for 1 turn, and a 30% decrease speed debuff on all enemies for 2 turns. If an enemy is from the Gallon Pact, places a freeze debuff on them for 2 turns instead, and this debuff cannot be blocked or resisted. So pretty much the same change as the A1, but also additionally it decreases the target's turn meter by 30% if the enemies from the Gallon Pact decreases the turn meter by 50%. And this is actually a big turn meter decrease, quite interesting, but here comes the catch. We have Marius, which is pretty much accessible to anyone at some point, and if you try to decrease his turn meter, he will counterattack, so that's kind of like a downside of this skill, but it's not bad in general if you don't face Marius. Then the passive, whenever this champion or an ally, so this is the change, previously it was just this champion, now it's this champion or an ally, receives a debuff from an enemy, has a 30% chance of placing a freeze debuff on that enemy for 1 turn. Actually a pretty cool passive, kind of similar to the one that Tormin has, where Tormin would place a freeze debuff if you are trying to increase the turn meter or buff your champions. He will do it if you try to debuff one of the champions. This chance increases to 100% and the debuff cannot be blocked or resisted if the target is from the Gallon Pact. So again, he definitely has a problem with Gallon Pact champions, and then his base speed will be increased from 100 to 105, which is also not bad. Now his alternate form will get, a little bit more love. On his A1, he will now ignore 15% of the target's defense. If the target is under freeze debuff, ignores 35% of the target's defense, which is quite a lot. This is pretty much like a merciless set on him. If this attack kills an enemy, resets the cooldown of one of this champion's random skills. The next buff is on the A2, so everything pretty much stays the same, just the damage multiplier will be increased, which is a good sign. Hopefully he will hit hard enough now to make a difference. Then on the A3, it's a single target attack. Almost everything stays the same, but he will ignore block damage buffs if the target is under freeze now. So that's new. And then he will also place a freeze debuff on all enemies if the target is killed. So he's actually placing a freeze. If he kills a target with this skill, he will place a freeze debuff on everybody else, which is kind of interesting, but also weird at the same time, because to ignore 100% defense and block damage, you have to place a freeze debuff first. So you kind of would, maybe place freeze debuffs with his passive in his first form, or try to place it, then swap, use this skill, kill one target, and then place a freeze debuff on everybody else. But then again, he's placing a lot of freeze debuffs here, a lot of debuff placing. So he's going to be a sheep magnet, definitely, or get wanded or something. So I'm not sure about this buff, if it's going to make a difference or not. But we will see, I guess, on some testing, and we will figure it out as soon as this buff goes live. This freeze debuff can also not be blocked or resisted by enemies from the Gallon Pact, and the damage multiplier is increased as well. So obviously they're trying to make him a damage dealer for PvP. And last but not least, the passive counterattacks with the Rhyme Cleave skill. Whenever an enemy increases the cooldown of any of this champion's skills, actually pretty interesting. So that's the A1. Whenever an ally is killed, has a 50% chance of placing a freeze debuff on all enemies for 1 turn. This chance increases to 100% and cannot be blocked or resisted by enemies from the Gallon Pact. So this is actually a pretty cool passive. If one of your champions gets killed, the enemy team will get controlled. If they're from the Gallon Pact, it's going to be a 100% chance. If not, then it's a 50% chance, which is still quite a high chance, right? But then again, like I said, you can get polymorphed, you can get wanded, and yeah, we will see how this works out. Let me know in the comments below, guys, what do you think about this rebalance? Will it make a difference? Will it take Fjorad out of the vault? Because he's definitely a solid vault keeper at this very moment, and hopefully it's going to make a difference. But yeah, let me know in the comments below what you guys think. Now, let's take a look at the Gallon Pact champions, which Fjorad might be good against. Now, we have Gizmek, for example, right? But the problem with Gizmek is that he is magic affinity. Fjorad is spirit. So I don't know if he will work well against Gizmek, but at least he can or could, put some freeze buffs on him and get some control over Gizmek. But then again, he will probably be built in Stone Skin, and I don't think the freeze will go through Stone Skin. So I think the affinity of Fjorad will definitely be a problem, because there are a lot of magic affinity champions that make it quite hard to make use of spirit affinity champions. Then we have Lazarius here as well. Obviously Donny, not so much used in the high-end arena, but I definitely see some people using him. Sulfurion, also quite interesting. Actually might be a nice counter against Sulfurion, because he will place HP burns on your champions, right? He will try to do that. And if he does that, Fjorad will have a chance to place a freeze debuff with his passive. Then obviously from the Skinwalkers, we have quite a few in here. Galeas, Mezomel, both are definitely used in the arena. Nishak, Marius, right? Wukong. So yeah, there are a lot of champions where Fjorad might come in handy, that the freeze cannot be resisted or blocked. Then there's also Ashnar, right, which does place HP burns. So yeah, I can definitely see some use in Fjorad. Hopefully his multipliers will be high enough so he can actually deal damage, or deal enough damage to be viable. But there are definitely some champions in the Gallon Pact that he could potentially counter. But then we also have another solid buff for one of the Void legendary champions, and it's actually the only one that I'm having from the Ogrins, and it is Togron. And yeah, so he's been really underwhelming. He has some nice abilities, but we didn't really know where to make use of him. Obviously, I thought about building him for my Ogrins Faction Wars, which I'm definitely gonna do now. I'm gonna show you why. It's definitely cool that champions like this, get some love. We have a lot of Void legendaries that really need a buff, and this was definitely one of them. Now, the A1 will have a 70% chance now of applying a buff spread, which is pretty interesting, taking one random buff from each ally and placing it on all allies. And this is very cool, especially if you have champions that are, very selfish with their buffs. Now you can theoretically take those buffs and spread them on your champions, and then extend them and make sure they keep them. So it's from a 20% chance to a 70% chance. And as you can see here, you can, book it and get another 30% chance. That means it will go up to a 100% chance. So every time you use the A1, you will take one buff from your allies and spread it on the other ones. So this will definitely enable and open up different comps. And yeah, I'm very curious to see what people will come up with. Now the A2, Heals all allies by 20%, still the same. Of his max HP, places a 30% increased speed buff on all allies for 2 turns. Also a very nice buff. And then this is new, also places a 15% continuous heal buff and a block debuffs on all allies for 2 turns. The only thing that I don't like here is that he's placing, you know, the increased speed and the continuous heals before he buffs the block debuffs. At least that's how I'm reading this, how I'm understanding this. It would be much nicer if he would place the block debuffs first and then the other buffs, but it is what it is. At least he can do this, and this makes him actually maybe viable for a Chimera team, right? Increased speed, block debuffs, a buff spread. Pretty interesting, to be honest. But that's not all. On the A3, he's increasing the turn meter of all allies by 20%, right? But before he does that, he is now removing all debuffs from all allies. So it's a cleanse. I wish the block debuffs would go with this skill instead of the other one now, honestly. But, you know, he's cleansing, boosting the turn meter of all allies by 20%, plus an additional 2% for each debuff removed. So this can be a huge turn meter boost if all of your champions are under free debuffs, depending on what content you're doing, right? Let's say it's like 10 debuffs, it will be another 20% more turn meter, and then suddenly you're boosting for 40% turn meter. Pretty interesting skill. Then places a 50% increase accuracy buff on all allies for 2 turns. Really nice skill. I really love the changes here. A lot of buffs, a cleanse, a lot of turn meter boosting, a heal, and a buff spread so far. Now, let's get to the most interesting part, which is his passive. Increases allies' damage dealt by 10% if they currently have less HP than their target. If an ally's HP is equal to or greater than their target's, increases their damage dealt by 20% instead. This is insane. This is a crazy passive. We are currently in a meta where you want to increase the damage dealt by percentages and get more multipliers, and he's now doing this alongside, you know, a lot of other stuff that he can do. And this is not everything. Now, if your ally's HP is now equal or greater, you will deal 20% more damage, but that's not realistic in like Hydra fights or Chimera fights because they have like a crazy HP. You will never reach that. But for like PvP content, this can definitely help. But that's not all. So increases this champion's and each ally's max HP by 10% every time this champion uses an active skill, and this stacks up to 50% and resets each round. So in case you don't know the difference between a round and a turn, so basically the first wave in a, you know, dungeon is 1 round, then the second round is the second wave, and the third round is the boss fight usually. So boss fights, for example, like Hydra and Chimera, they only have 1 round. So you can stack up, you know, your ally's HP up to 50% every time he uses a skill, and he only needs to use 5 skills, and then you reach the cap. But then it gets better. Also increases each ally's max HP by 5% every time they use an active skill, and this stacks up to 50% as well, and also resets each round. Will not increase the max HP of bosses. So I don't know why they put it in there. Maybe if you are facing a Dark Fae or something and Togron is on an enemy team, he cannot increase the HP of Dark Fae, which is good, right? So in general, you can get your allies' HP up by 100%. I don't actually know if it works that way, but you will increase it by 50% every time he uses a skill, and then another 50% every time your allies use a skill. So you will probably increase the value of the HP by 50%, and then the new value by 50% as well. That's how I am understanding it. Not quite sure how the maths are working here, but that's how I am understanding it. Maybe you know better. Let me know in the comments below how do you think this works. But I think in general, this is a huge buff for Togron, and he will definitely come out of the vault and be viable for a lot of new things. And I think, you know, even the A1 will just open up new possibilities. And then we also have the 10% damage increase on the passive, which is huge. alongside the max HP increase. I mean, what more can you ask for? This is definitely a Void Legendary worth to pull now, in my opinion. But yeah, let me know in the comments below, how do you feel about this buff? Do you think it's a great one? I definitely think it's a huge buff, and I'm very positive and happy about this one, also because I do own this champion. Now I've been thinking which max HP would be nice to increase, right? Like from which champion would this effect be nice? And yeah, like I said, what would be nice? It would be nice on nice, basically. So his max HP is already being increased for each dead enemy and ally, and this is including bosses and their minions as well. So he can stack it up to 100% already. Then you get another, 2 times 50% from Togron. And I don't know how high you can get his max HP now with Togron as well. It might be actually crazy, not quite sure, but it would be super interesting to see. Also, he is scaling damage on his HP. I would like to see how high his damage can go with a fully, maxed out passive from Togron. Then we have a champion like Mountain King, for example, right? That is also scaling his damage on HP and attack. So quite interesting as well. But I think the most used ones in Arena that are based on HP are definitely nice. Then we have Embrys now, right? The free-to-play mythical. He's scaling his damage also on HP and accuracy. And Togron is actually buffing an increased accuracy buff as well, and stacking his HP. Then we have Narcissus, right? The partner of Ancora. He's scaling his damage of HP. And then another one that is, really common for people to use is Taras, and he scales from HP as well. So yeah, a lot of great HP nukers in the game, and I think this is a nice way to boost their damage. We don't have an increased HP buff anywhere, but his passive can actually be one in some kind of way. But yeah, guys, with that being said, that's pretty much about it. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you enjoyed, please hit the like button. It really goes a long way. Also, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more raid content. The YouTube algorithm is going to suggest you a video that you might like right here, and see you in the next one.